is Tom Gorey. Tom is an expert channel builder with over 25 years experience in multiple channels, including large retail, VAR integrator, distribution and logistics, DMR, and telecommunications. He played a key role developing fulfillment logistics strategies that resulted in dramatic share gains in computer distribution. He led teams that supported telecommunications giants and joint ventures selling enterprise applications to Fortune 1000 businesses as hosted applications with global deployment. Most recently, he had been developing telecommunications indirect sales channels through strategic engagement with some of the best and brightest VARs, integrators, DMRs, and consultants. He has an engineering degree from the University of Washington, where he also serves as a mentor to students in multiple departments. All phone lines are in a listen-only mode, and later there will be a question and answer session with instructions being given at that time. You may also ask a question at any time by using the chat window located in the control panel. Chat questions will also be answered at the end of the presentation. Today's session is being recorded, and you'll be provided a copy of today's materials following the call. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn the presentation over to Tom. Take it away.
Great, thank you. Appreciate the introduction there. Should I close this window here, this piece? This control piece, is that visible?
Nope, you should be good. Nope, we don't see it on our end.
Very good. Then thank you very much. Sorry for the housekeeping piece there. And trying to move to the next slide. Sorry, Lisa, I'm having trouble moving from slide to slide here.
Ah. Oh.
Is there a manual advance on the control panel?
Nope, unfortunately not. Maybe close out and back in again?
Nope, don't want to leave the webinar.
Nope, nope, don't do that.
Okay,
ah,
that'll work.
There we go. All right.
Okay, sorry about that. Sorry about that, everybody. So I want to talk about compensation in the cloud businesses. And it's different than what VARs are typically used to. Telecommunications people have been doing this for decades, and it's all about residual compensation and what goes on when you have a monthly bill, and a piece of that bill goes on to the partner who's selling the services. That has a lot of benefits, and it has some disadvantages, and it all has to do with the way things are structured. And of course, there's some things that pop up from time to time, and we're going to talk about some of that today. But compensation is moving in this direction in the cloud space. This has also been happening in telecom as things have moved from bounty into more residual programs steadily over the past 20 years. So poll question number 1. How many in the audience are currently selling services on term agreements of at least a year?
All right, here it is. All right, so once again, how many in the audience are currently selling services on term agreements of at least 1 year? So please select one, either yes or no, and we'll give everyone a second or two to go ahead and get their answer in. Maybe about another 10 seconds. Be sure to get your answers in on how many in the audience are currently selling services on term agreements of at least 1 year. All right, and we'll go ahead and close out that poll. And for our answers, we have yes is a whopping 88%, and no is 13%.
Great, great. So this is a problem that you guys will be facing if you're not already. So customer engagement. what does a customer want from a supplier? And going back through all the studies and everything that's ever been done and all the conversations we've had in our lives talking to customers, they're hiring partners, they're hiring suppliers to remove points of pain. They want to increase their efficiency. They want to increase their competitiveness. So pretty basic, pretty simple things, and very clear in what they're looking for. And now we get to the busy slide. Customers' expectation. Customers, and there are other seminars that have been dedicated to this concept, they are looking at a lot of different places to get information on what to buy and who to buy it from. So they're interacting today with the McKinsey & Company studies have shown with almost 6 sales channels per company when they're making an evaluation. And that might be for a project, it might be for their overall business. But it's everything from traditional advertising, websites, social media, various forms of social media. There's different things going on in different channels there. Direct salespeople, customer retained consultants, and then consultants that are paid by the suppliers that are soliciting those end users. And of course, technology changes is going to cause different people to go after different types of support and at different points in time. Market conditions will change. If a competitor comes up with something and has a new enablement, people are going to have to respond to that, or they're going to end up having the bad side of the impact from somebody else's increase in efficiency. So things will change out there. And then, of course, customers are not always clear on what they need on the first day. They know they want to move forward, but as they move forward and they start to understand the problem more, their needs might change, their desires might change. So differences in deployment, differences in expectations, differences in just what they're experiencing as they start to deploy different technology, it's going to cause them to reevaluate as they move forward. So 3 different considerations on the delivery is compensation, how do partners get paid, our part, support, how are partners supported, who's doing the support, and then non-solicitation. When a partner is involved, one of the great fears, particularly in the boardroom of most of the suppliers, is, can I trust the partner? Who are they loyal to and why? So we'll go into compensation first. And in the traditional VAR space, it's been a project. There's hardware involved, there's software licenses that are involved, there might be design services, but these are project-based, and there are percentages, or there's profit, markup, billing, rebilling of products that have a title that go along with it. So it's pretty much when a project is signed and completed and delivered, if the customer moves in a different direction, they're free to choose somebody different. If they want to buy additional pieces of hardware, they can actually buy that from different places as long as they're doing the deployment themselves or a replacement, or they can pay the second VAR or the third VAR or internal staff to be able to do some of that labor work. But it's project by project. So it's been protect my customer, make sure you stay engaged, but it hasn't had a financial impact other than who's going to make the profit on the next transaction. And then there's the referral bounty model, where a third party comes in, delivers the prospect, and the company's direct sales force or a designated implementer takes over. And it's a one fee for bringing the customer, bringing the opportunity. And then that's paid and done. So no issues on that. And then there's the residual model. Supplier pays, so the customer is getting the benefit of some of the work from the partner for free. And it's usually a % of the monthly bill. And that part is on term agreements typically within the telecom space and in many cloud services. There's a lot of things that are more transactional in nature that may come up as month to month. There are things where the bill based on usage or the number of seats may change from month to month, but it's a month-to-month type bill or it's a term contract. And term contracts typically have some pretty onerous tasks or charges if somebody decides to leave the contract early. And in the telecom space, that's typically the remainder of all of the payments. You can move forward, you can pay the bill and get out and not have any further interference, but you're still stuck even if you disconnect all the services, all the cloud or telecommunication services. So that's where it gets to be an interesting problem here. So if I go on to the places where you find this, it's in cloud, software applications, software as a service, platform as a service will fall under this, and infrastructure as a service. And some of the things we need to talk about here, though, are there's a cost to acquire the customer, the economic consideration. There's all of the whining and dining. There's the identifying of who the right prospect is. There's the time it takes to educate that customer. There's all of the rest of the things that you find in the T&E reports, where you might take somebody out to an event. You might put on presentations. You might bring in industry experts or other various ways to get the customer to understand and move the buying process forward. And those costs, those upfront costs, exist whether the deal eventually happens or does not. And if it doesn't happen, it's not a design contract that was paid up front. It's coming out of that residual from a completed contract. And it takes time to recover that. Typically, it's some portion of what in telecom terms is a 3-year term, is very typical. There are some 2-year, there's occasionally some 1-year, but it's typically a 3-year term. And that's a reflection of how much time it takes to be able to implement a service and to recover the cost and to make a profit for the partner. And then there's a life of value or life of customer contract value that people are looking at. Obviously, you want to keep the customer as long as you can if you're getting a piece of that bill. So the operational challenges that come up on here is when a customer decides that they want a different partner. And it might be because of the technology change. It might be because the project changes. It might be because their expectations of what they're trying to accomplish is changing. But they may have gone to a different partner the second time around because they need different expertise. Someone might have expertise in one area, and now they need expertise in a different area to develop a different part of the business. And again, from my background recently in telecom, people might have signed up to get voice services. And then they move into, oh, I need security. So I need somebody that has background with network security and trying to make sure that we keep everything locked down. They might need electronic commerce. They might need a logistics and supply chain system set up. They might need an ERP system implemented. There's a lot of different things that will change, and they need different expertise. When that happens and they start to make moves with who their servicing partners are, that's when all of this existing infrastructure and commission structure starts to create problems. So going into that, just a basic timeline here, and I tried to make it so it's a color code here. The customer signs a contract, the red section there from January to April, I'll just call that a 4-month sales cycle. And then it takes time depending on the type of product. It could be 48 hours to do an implementation. If there are other things that need to be built up, staged, tested, or different things that need to be provisioned, that could take up to 60 days. It's in that yellow section. And then when it goes live in your billing, there's 36 months in there under that green cycle. And that's expected to be the profit piece for the partner. And then when you get back into the end of that contract term, it's a renewal, and the question mark is, do they renew with that supplier? Do they continue forward with that partner? And there's various things that can happen out there. But customers' needs change. So anytime in this cycle, if the customer makes a need change, if they make a partner change, then you can have a problem in what looks to be initially that green zone. So next poll question for everyone.
Okay, so this is a 2-part poll question, so you'll have 2 answers here. So how often do these occur within your business? And is it a growing problem? So how often, frequently, occasionally, or rarely? And is it a growing problem, yes or no? 2-parter. And we'll give everyone a couple of seconds to get their votes in. About another 10, 12 seconds or so. All right, go ahead and close that poll out and share our results. So how often do these problems, or how often do these occur? It was 100% occasionally, so no frequently and no rarely. And then is it a growing problem? We're split at 33% that say yes, 33% that say no, so the other 30% are dead in the middle.
Okay, can you run the first part again? Frequently, occasionally, and rarely. How do we come out?
100% occasionally.
Okay, so that's interesting. So right now, that means that people really haven't. Well, they're selling services. 88% of you said you're selling these services as a residual model today, and it only comes up occasionally. That's good news. So do we expect that to change? And a third of you say yes, a third of you say no, and a third of you haven't got enough experience in it, is what my interpretation of that is at this point in time. So I'll go on to the third area right now, is the non-solicitation piece. This gets to be really interesting. And if I talk to product managers, if I talk to the C-level executive suite, there is an ungodly fear that partners will move a customer for a spiff. They believe that customers will be moved by the partner from one supplier to another because there might be a few points more in residual commission that's paid. And this is typically depending on the organization. Do they have a channel-centric philosophy? Do they have channel revenue in a substantial percentage of their business? What is the background of those C-level executives? And depending on where that sits, where their experience lies, they really don't have a good understanding of how a partner works. And what we talked about up front, just in the example, the 4-month lead cycle to do an engagement before a customer decides to sign and buy services. That can be just as difficult. The more complicated the services are, the larger the scale, the more locations, the more different services that are involved and entangled with each other, the harder it is to make that move. And in the last 25 years, I have very seldom seen a partner ever make a move just because they can make a couple points more. I've never seen a partner make a move for a spiff. But that's not necessarily the thought in the C-level of the executive offices. And so until they understand that, there's going to be all kinds of issues that come up with non-solicitation. And this is part where in the contracts for how the partners get paid gets to be rather interesting, because every contract that I have seen from dozens and dozens of suppliers, just in the research that I've done in the companies that I've worked for, both, all have this non-solicitation. And the concept is you can't move the customer. If you do move a customer, obviously there's no more commission being paid on that one, but the hammer is typically that they can stop commission on every other customer that you're getting commission on. So as you start to develop a bigger practice with a supplier, that can be a pretty onerous way to prevent somebody from trying to make a move. And where that leaves a customer is between a rock and a hard place, because a customer may have very legitimate reasons totally outside of, I no longer like this VAR, my favorite sales rep left, but they may have different business needs. They may have a different person in charge of IT at the customer, and they have a relationship of trust with a different partner. Or again, talking about different technology and different needs, they may need to move in a different direction, and it may change the way services are being deployed. So what ends up happening with that is the commission piece gets changed, and or there's pressure to change it. So as we go through that process, here we are jumping off a cliff. What do we do? And go back to the contract. The contract I mentioned has some pretty onerous terms sometimes, and sometimes it gets very specific. most of the contracts will say that a partner gets paid on the orders, not on the customer, but on the orders that they take. So as long as that service is being provided, or for whatever length of time the contract specifies, they're paid for those services that are related to individual orders. And that might be life of customer, it might be for some length of time, and it may have different terms on renewals. There's different processes, different commission plans that are out there. But if a customer wants to make a change on that mid-contract cycle, then what happens? And again, they go back to orders, they go back to whether somebody is going to make a change, and do they have any contractual rights. So I'll go back into poll question number 3.
All right, so our final question. If the customer makes a change in servicing partner, when does partner number 1's commission rights terminate? So would it be a 30-day notice, a 90-day notice, the end of the current service contract term, or the life of the customer? And we'll give everyone a few seconds to go ahead and get their vote in. So again, when does partner number 1's commission rights terminate? 30 days, 60 days, end of current service contract term, or life of the customer? All right, and we'll go ahead and get this closed on up and share these results. So, Tom, it says here, if the customer makes a change in servicing partner, when does partner number 1's commission rights terminate? 33% said 30 days notice. No one said 90. 56% said at the end of the current service contract term, and 11% said the life of the customer.
Great.
Okay,
that's interesting. That's interesting. So 30 days notice. So if, and this is kind of interesting, I talked to a distributor yesterday, and they were talking about a particular large vendor that is has services deployed through various strategic partners, and they were told that an email could be sent requesting a change of servicing partner. And all it takes is that email to be sent, and the partner of record is changed. What isn't said there, but is the obvious implication, is the commission would stop for partner number 1 and start up for partner number 2. What's unclear to me is who has the right to send that email. Is there any right of appeal, and does there anything happen to protect that first partner's commission? And when you have the technology provider, and then you have the servicing implementer, and then you have the partner who's selling things, there's a lot of people in that chain to have different contractual requirements. But I can guarantee you the financial people only want to pay one commission through the system. And they typically don't care who gets it, because they're finance guys. They don't understand the channel relationships and logistics. But for the 33% of you that said 30 days notice, that could be a major problem moving forward. 90 days notice, it looks like we're either in one camp or the other. And then the end of the current service contract term. As I sit on the Technology Channel Association, I've sit in various groups to support partner organizations. We've got councils made up of suppliers, distributors, and large partners, and we have conversations about various topics of interest to the group to move the industry positions forward. And every now and then I'll bring one of these questions up. And the current thinking, I would say the consensus is the end of the current service contract term everybody feels is fair. It's a compromise in some cases, but people think that they should get compensated for what they actually have contracted, which is my personal opinion as well. I think that that's what's fair. So that's 56% of us believe that. And then the life of the customer. And the life of the customer part gets to be kind of interesting, because a partner might disengage Suppliers hate life of customer because if the partner doesn't stay engaged with the customer, there's no technology change, updates, there's nobody defending and making sure the customer is serviced properly. And the life of the customer, guys, not in all cases, but in maybe I'll say half the cases just for a discussion point, engage the customer, get the deal sold, and then leave it to the service provider, the software provider, the telecommunications provider to take care of the customer from that point forward. And there's a certain logic to that that makes sense because the services are controlled by the provider, not by the partner. But there's a certain part of that where it needs to be a teamwork piece. And the contracts, I have never seen a contract where it gave responsibilities and obligations to the partner other than delivering orders clean and being fair, honest, ethical, and not falling into the trap of doing things that might be illegal solicitations or misrepresentations. But as long as those things come in clean and partners invariably do things the right way on that, then the service provider's obligation has been fulfilled. So there's a good basis for the 11% to say this makes sense, but ultimately there's going to be some friction in that camp. And it looks like that's a pretty small part here. Usually I see a little bit higher percent in that space. So how have others addressed these issues is an interesting question. So some basically say you're stuck with it. You're going to get paid the way the contracts and everything were laid out. Interestingly enough, the customer is never a part of how the compensation works on the back end. So they're the ones with the need. They're the ones that are causing the change. And they're the ones that are impacted based on how everybody else in the system makes these decisions. And sometimes when the provider says, I'm not going to pay the first partner anymore for whatever reason, whatever justification they come up with, partner goes back to the customer, they have a conversation, customer calls the supplier and says, if my partner is no longer getting paid, I'm not staffing for this, I'm going to have to change you out as a supplier. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, and they actually do change suppliers. So that's one of the ways that these things work. Sometimes the VARs, encouraged by the supplier, will work it out between themselves. Sometimes they recognize they have different expertise. They recognize that it's an area where they can collaborate, and many VARs are used to working with other VARs to satisfy needs and expertise that they don't have. So sometimes that works out pretty well. Sometimes the VAR gets paid through the end of the current service contract term, which is what 56% of us on this call said. It makes sense. And then VAR number one starts to engage on new projects, and as new services are sold, they get paid on that. I've seen once in the last decade that a supplier elected to pay both VARs. It's a pretty expensive value proposition for that. And if you're going into a telecom space, a typical commission might be 20%. Very, very common, 20% paid out to the distributor that is split between the distributor and the servicing partners. So if that had to be 2, that's 40% of that bill going out, dramatically changes the economics and the EBITDA in the system. So I don't see that very often. And recently, if we're talking about over-the-top services like unified communications, there's a lot of suppliers out there. There's a lot of people that are fighting for market share. And I've seen things as high as 6 times upfront residual or a spiff on top of the residual commission. And if that 6 times MRC upfront on a 3-year contract term on top of the 20% nominal residual, that's an effective 37% commission rate just from that. So if that were going on, there's no way that somebody is going to pay double to 37% and get up into that range. And then there's a buyout. A buyout where there is a planned process. If this happens, if a customer makes a move down this path, then there is some formula that's based on what's left, who takes over, and typically it's paying the first partner through the end of that contract term as an effective piece, but it accelerates the date where the second partner takes over ownership and the day-to-day management. But the first partner continues to get paid through the length of time that it takes to satisfy that obligation. That's the buyout part. I can tell you I've seen that in 2 cases. It represents a logical thought process, I think, to the problem. Partners hate it because they don't understand always, or they don't trust that it's being done for the right reasons. They don't believe necessarily that they've had a say or an appropriate dialogue and conversation, and there's a fear that it might be manipulated, or it might be a way to end a program and take business away from partners and put it into direct. So there's some fear on that one. But so at this point, I'd like to open it up to discussion and questions and get your thoughts on what do you think should happen here, and what observations have you had as a group?
Okay, well, we'll give a couple of seconds here to get some questions in. All right, we did have one come in from David, and David asks, what are you presuming the servicing partner is servicing? And then, is this a white label service or a partner branded service?
This would be a manufacturer branded service. So this might be something like an AT&T or a Verizon, a CenturyLink as a telecom provider. It could be a Microsoft solution. It could be a cloud computing solution as a platform, but branded by the supplier of the service. There isn't any reason why this could not be a white box, a white label solution, but you end up with the same thing if somebody goes from one partner with a one white box solution to another white label solution. Somebody is going at some point to want to make a change, and if it's a simple customer agrees that they're going to pay for what they contracted for, great. If somebody sees this as, I think it's probably a bigger problem with the branded one. If somebody were to go back to Verizon and say, I'm no longer working with partner number 1, I want to work with partner number 2, but I'm buying services from Verizon. That's where this gets to be a pretty sticky problem.
Okay.
Thank you, David.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, David. All right. Another question comes in. This is from Jim. And he asks, has any supplier taken a leadership position on this topic?
From the buyout perspective, Integra has tried to put that into all of their contracts. When I talk to the bigger brand names, the bigger market share people in telecom, I have not seen anybody take a leadership position out here. It's usually the conversation is we will address them one-off as an exception. And everyone has examples they remember, but everyone feels that they were able at some point to come to a solution that people would live with. But I've not seen anybody really taking a strong leadership position that has significant market share.
Okay, well, that's very interesting, actually. All right, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Jim. All right, we have two more questions that came in. Hang on one second. Julie asks, how do suppliers handle situations when a company gets bought out and both the former company and the purchasing company have different agents but the same supplier?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Typically, I think at some point in time, the supplier has to engage, have a conversation with the customer, and just ask them what they're doing, what their intentions are, so people can sort out what's really going on. But that's an interesting one. Anytime you have buyouts of one supplier to another supplier, you're going to end up with a situation like that where different people or maybe it's different points in time where different providers were contracted, or maybe they were moving things away from one to get away from the other. So each situation there is a little bit different. but that could be a sticky one. Ultimately, I think the company that survives is going to have the conversation and make sure they understand what the customer's requirement is. Because ultimately, they're the ones that are paying the bill. They're the ones that are making the decision of whether they buy or not and who they're really buying it from.
All right.
Good question.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you very much, Julie, for that one. All right, next one, Jessica asks, is it better to define this up front in the contract or just wait and see?
I would say my preference is to have it where people understand what the baseline is. If you have it defined in the contract, some type of a buyout, that it would be preferable. The nice part about that is everybody understands where things sit as a baseline. If you need to adjust it, that's what management gets paid for, is taking a look at that situation and determining, are there circumstances here that were not foreseen? Are there mitigating circumstances that suggest something different should happen or some modification? But I think having a baseline is better than everybody walking in upset, angry, whatever emotions are in place when you've got large dollars. If this is a small customer, if people are dealing with something where a commission's a few $100s, it's not a big deal. If you're talking about an enterprise customer, and some of the deals that I've done have been as high as $800,000 per month, and you start spinning off $100,000 a month in commission, there's substantial dollars here, and that has major impacts. People get hired to support customers. People get laid off when they lose customers like that. They can really impact the business. So I think having things be undefined is a problem, and I think it's a bigger problem depending on the size of the average customer engagement. How much money is there, and what does that look like as a percent of business for that partner?
All right,
Another great question.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica, for that one. All right, next one is from Jason. He asks, do you feel there is an acceptable best practice in providing high-performing partners with some form of renewal protection while still allowing customers the ability to remain flexible if change is necessary?
That's a good question, too, and I think I'd probably want to understand the context on that one better, but having a formal process does make sense. Again, because customers' needs can change and because there are so many services are moving from a conventional deployment into a cloud deployment, usually those type of transitions are going to go through several iterations before people find the right balance. And that's going to cause things to be set, reset, re-engineered. Different suppliers may find that models don't work for them anymore and they withdraw services or modify them. And that's going to have an impact too based on how that impacts that end customer. So there's going to be a lot of learning processes that go on in this one. I think that's kind of an ongoing discussion.
Okay, thanks, Jason, for that question as well. All right, next question from Chris, and Chris asks, why do you think Salesforce.com has not moved to a model of providing ongoing commissions to their partners? Last time he checked, they only reward partners for new ads.
Are you talking about Salesforce as a supplier? I think they believe that they don't need to pay commissions to be able to have their solution deployed, that there are people that can make revenue from their product by the services that they provide, education, training, configuration, deployment, or for other things that they tack onto it. So I think that's the Salesforce model. And if they put a commission in there, they would probably end up raising their costs because that's not in their model today. And raising your cost against your competitor and a competitive market position might not be something they're interested in. But I haven't had that conversation directly with Salesforce. I'm hearing conversations from other people on the outside. In terms of Salesforce having commission built into their system that would allow people to sell other services using it as a PRM module, partner relationship system, then there are other third-party solutions that plug into that to allow commissions to be paid. But commissions paid on the Salesforce piece, if that's what you're talking about, I think that's just a choice of how they've chosen to go to market.
Okay, great. All right, and we have one final question. This one's coming from Josh, and he says, have you experienced any of these situations where things just got really ugly, and how did they turn out?
Yes, I did. I found one where it was a large customer. It was somebody with a prominent, well-known name, and because of that, they had many people that were knocking on their door and trying to help them solve their business problems. And one of those was an efficiency consultant of sorts, and they suggested that they could make changes by reconfiguring services in a different manner. And to do that, they suggested instead of working with the first partner that was engaged, that they should go with a different partner, someone who was about 1,000 miles away, physically separated. And what it came down to when we investigated this, and I had a company's ethics officer, there were attorneys involved all around, everywhere, and it came down to, it looks like this extra person that came in as the efficiency expert was getting a commission from the partner for bringing customers in based on a percentage of the business that they brought. So with the customer going to the first VAR that was involved in this, that commission wasn't due him. They were already signed up as a customer. The only way that he could get paid there with I think this is the one time I might use the term kickback, for them to get compensated for moving it to the second partner, they had to get the second partner to replace the services from the first one. So it got ugly because it was driven in that kind of a manner. It wasn't necessarily something that the first partner didn't have the capability to do, particularly if they were being coached that something might be a different configuration that would benefit the customer. But instead of in a collaborative approach, they were going for extra dollars, billing the customer on the front end for their expertise, and then taking a residual commission from referring to a different partner. That got pretty ugly.
All right. All right, well, that seems to be it for our questions. So, Tom, thank you so much for offering your time and sharing your knowledge with us today. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending the webinar. Please do take a few moments to fill out your post-event survey. Your input is very important to us. This does conclude today's conference, and you may now disconnect. Thanks again, Tom.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.